Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Bain, and today I will be presenting a brief discussion of my take or analyzing the feminist model theory and its applications to science education, what it is, and how it also connects to my own experiences in the science classroom and teaching. So, one of the things that I discovered in this particular model was kind of understanding that it was a step by step framework that shows how oppression operates and how it can be challenged. And so, when we talk about how oppression operates, we have to be able to look at the core model and we have to recognize, first of all, that systems of power and oppression exist. And it also emphasized that we cannot just critique a system or talk about a system or look at, this particular oppression is existing, but it's also calling for us to act, right? To be the change that we want to see. And so the model should motivate educators to take responsibility for equity, advocacy, inclusion. And that's what makes, in my opinion, what makes this particular model very powerful. And so first I'll start off with the core of the model. Like, what is the basis of the model? So the model shows us that oppression leads to exclusion, right? And if nothing is done, the systems of power continue to keep certain groups out, right? But inclusivity doesn't just happen by accident. That means identifying the systems and saying it needs to change does not make it change. And this particular model says that it requires deliberate action. And so the goal of the feminist model theory is equity, advocacy, and meaningful change, meaning that we have to take focus and we have to be the change again that we want to see. And we have to be very intentional about inclusivity. Now, inclusivity as a practice. So if we are challenging these particular ideas, these particular powers, we have to know what that looks like. And there's several scholars that went through and kind of talked about this. So scholars like Campbell and Wasco, in an article in 2000, reminded us that feminist approach help reveal hidden powers of dynamics, right, that often go unnoticed. So following this particular idea or this theory, especially in the classroom, we're able to really take a really close look at some of the hidden power dynamics that we don't see. In STEM, there were also some challenges in STEM, right? Old thoughts, old hypocrisies, old things that were not necessarily being addressed, right? The feminist pedagogy challenged these old ideas and these old ways and the way we thought of things that took place, in particular in science. And it allowed to create new voices, right? New spaces where new voices could be heard. And so the model itself just isn't about representation. That means not just showing up and being there or saying that these particular people can, this group can be there, but it's about actively reshaping classrooms so that all students can thrive. I always think about this as the ongoing argument between, or the synergy even, between equity and access. It's not okay to have one and not have the other. And so when you talk about the feminist theory, I think this is a great application of those two words together in order for us to have, even if we have access, if we don't have equity, then all students can't thrive. So that's one thing about this particular theory that I thought also kind of stuck out and struck a chord with me as well. And not just the ones that already have privilege. So when we're talking about, for instance, black and white, whether if I'm a black female versus a white female, if the old idea that males were the dominant scientists, then just in the idea of being able to be white, sometimes may put a white female in place of, before I came up and we see African Americans represented in the lab. But having a female there that's not African American doesn't necessarily address my issue, because they tend to be able, in my opinion, would have privilege over an African American female. All right. And so, what are some of the barriers to inclusivity? Well, the one thing is inclusivity is not automatic. It has to be, doesn't just appear on its own. We have to um, actually take action. And Rinking and Martin shows in their study in 2018 that stereotypes about who belongs in STEM, along with peer influence, often discourage girls, for instance, from pursuing advanced science. So this kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Being able to challenge some of those old ideas is very important. And the feminist model theory pushes us to name the barriers, understanding that there is a barrier that says girls should not pursue, kind of, there was an underlying idea based on, of course, access, that says girls shouldn't pursue or advanced science degrees, right? And sometimes peer influences shape these particular course choices, right? And action, again, is still needed to disrupt these inequalities. And so we have to make sure that we're doing that, and the feminist model theory pushes us to do that. Name what they are. Application in science education. So the masculinized science prioritizes objectivity and exclusion. So Harding in 1991 says that the model connects directly to science education because authority and objectivity often take precedence over collaboration and inclusivity, right? Especially in the science lab. And so the feminist pedagogy flips the script by emphasizing collaboration, inquiry, and student voice, right? And so also one of the other things that was talked about in some of the writings were the idea that representation matters, for calling out the fact that if we don't see, a lot of times children don't see people that look like them, then that also goes toward the idea that they may not belong in the science lab. If we only show white men in white lab coats, right, and we don't show any people of color, then what we're underlying saying, even if it's not outright spoken, it does tell us in a non-spoken way that African Americans or students of color don't belong in the lab. So this, to me, is an example of those underlying power dynamics that are not always called out. And so when we change this narrative and they start to see people from underrepresented backgrounds in pictures in the lab, then we start to feel like they belong, right? And so that was the final step in the model. It is about turning disruption into advocacy and systematic change. We have to disrupt the narrative, right, in these particular spaces. So my personal reflection, again, my own experiences kind of mirrors my journey just a little bit, in the sense that I did grow up in an underrepresented inner city school. However, there was a lot of access, but a lot of times there was not equity. And sometimes this was because the social economic status of a lot of the students that went to my high school in particular. A lot of my peers were directed toward trade jobs rather than science. And mostly I believe this was because economic pressures and lack of representation. There were a lot of representation of blue collar workers. I was raised in the Midwest, so working at a factory was a thing. And so those type of ideas or stereotypes kind of went with, in particular, my high school, because it was, 60-40 African American. So there weren't a lot of representation of, for instance, Black science teachers. We did not have a lot of books at that time that had Black scientists. So again, that goes with that idea about, when we don't see, we need to see what we want to teach in the classroom, so that there is a sense of inclusivity when it comes to STEM in particular. Of course, my family support also was something that I had that some may not have as well. So that's another thing that contributed to that idea of my own belonging in science. I never had the idea that I didn't belong in a lab, right? Or that African Americans could not be scientists. But it wasn't something that was in my direct environment at school. It was something that was given to me in my own family. I did attend HBCU, of course, Tuskegee University. So that further perpetuated the idea that there were models of Black excellence in STEM, right, where they were celebrated. So, for instance, some students may came from environments where they experienced all of those things that we talked about before, that were the basis or the core models of why we use the feminist model theory. But the idea is that when they come to a HBCU, again, they were able to maybe see themselves, right? One of the things I wanted to say too before I conclude the presentation is there were some readings that I did that challenged me in the way that I actually teach, in particular with my non-for-profit. So I had a non-for-profit that was called Chem Chicks. I still have that program. And that particular program is a program where I connect chemistry to real world application in beauty and cosmetic science to inspire girls. And after reading and understanding what the feminist model theory was, that it wasn't just about female, it was about the idea of unjust, oppressive idea in society and systems that pushed out, that didn't allow us to be inclusive. And so when I thought about this particular program, I'm like, wow, I had to kind of reflect on the idea that was I one of those people that were unintentionally reinforcing stereotypes? This particular model kind of challenged me to keep disrupting barriers, and to make sure that boys and girls see themselves in science. And even if I didn't do it intentionally, based on this particular model, I think my personal opinion was that I was kind of reinforcing those particular stereotypes. And so, although I still have Chem Chicks, I did on my own think about the fact that, chemistry can be used, of course, in this particular instance, in particular, to bring boys and girls together to reinforce the ideas of science, even if it's not beauty and cosmetics. But just kind of making sure that I'm thinking about this in the classroom as well in any of community programming that I may have. So, in conclusion, the feminist model theory, of course, is more than just a framework. It really is a call to action. It helps us to identify oppression, recognize exclusion, and move toward advocacy and real change. When applied to science education, it pushes us to build inclusive classrooms where students can see themselves as scientists. For me, the theory is both a challenge and an inspiration, because it did allow me to reflect, but also I can adopt some of these particular theories and create spaces where everyone belongs and feels included. All right, thank you.